National relations expert Brooks Spector joins us now for more on that. Brooks, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. The decision itself, for many, quite surprising because his White House staff on Saturday, they say they knew that he is not going to pull out of the race, and they are quite taken aback by the fact that he has done so this Sunday. What do you think could have led to this decision? The intervention of Obama, others saying, is part of the reason. Of course, the high-profile gaffes and the, what would you say, disastrous debate performances could also be the factor.
Well, I think at the heart of it was probably a very intimate, very quiet, but very earnest conversation between Joe Biden and his wife. Because they've been married a long time, and she's been, in many ways, his principal advisor on all manner of things. And she may well have had a conversation that said, "Look, I want you around for a while. That you're not a young man. You need your strength for the good of yourself, for the good of your party, for the good of the country. Step aside and let the next generation step in." He's 81. Kamala Harris, for example, is 59. That's a whole different generation. And many of the other people whose names have been mentioned are roughly coterminous with Kamala Harris in age terms. But just after that announcement that he was stepping aside, there was the second announcement which said he was endorsing his vice president, the incumbent vice president, to be the candidate. And I'm old enough to remember when something relatively similar happened in 1968. Lyndon Johnson, who had won a major victory in the election of 1964 after succeeding John Kennedy after he had been assassinated, with the Vietnam War at its height, with a fair amount of urban unrest in major cities in the United States, Lyndon Johnson, although he had the delegates to, or would have had the delegates to win the nomination, decided that it was simply an untenable decision to keep going forward. Now, the crucial difference is back in 1968, there were really very few primaries. Most of the delegate picks took place at state party conventions, and they were largely managed or guided by bigwigs at the state level in the party politics. This time around, of course, virtually every state has had a primary, and so the delegate count is a reflection of the way in which Joe Biden won the primaries across the country, having sufficient delegates to go ahead and get the nomination if he so chose. The convention is next month, so it's just under 4 weeks. It's about 4 weeks away from now. And rather than let the chaos and confusion about whether he would or wouldn't run for re-election continue, I think it was this, from my perspective, is a magnanimous choice on his part to say, look, we have to continue to govern the country. That's more important than my becoming president yet again and running hard for the nomination, for the election after gaining the nomination. And this, don't forget, this upsets almost completely all of the planning and all of the thinking and all of the positioning that the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, has been set up with. He's no longer going to be campaigning against an old man, against a tired man, against a man who has verbal gaffes. He's going to be campaigning now against somebody who's a generation younger than he is, and who is agile and quick on her feet in language terms.
But she's coming into the race, quite as you put it, late in the game, if you like, 4 weeks before convention, 90 days or more towards the election. What are the polls saying about her popularity? What are they indicating? Kamala Harris, that is. Up
until now, the polls were not enormously forgiving about her. But part of that, of course, is because she has not been in the forefront. The issue for a long time has been Joe Biden's evident frailties or weaknesses rather than Kamala Harris's strengths or skills. Going forward, you're going to start seeing polling data that speaks to that because there'll be a lag. There'll be a few days really before the polling begins to reflect these earth-shattering decisions. But also remember, she has been in the forefront of one issue which half the country is already largely on her side. Not everybody, certainly, but largely. And that's been the question of women's reproductive rights and right to privacy in the process in the face of state legislatures in some of the states of the country severely restricting that after a Supreme Court decision the other year. So she comes to this with some evident strengths, and she has, after all, been the incumbent vice president now for close to 4 years, and she's been in every important meeting, and she sits in the cabinet, and so she's not a neophyte at this business at this point. So you ask me in a week what the polls say, and we'll have a much firmer grip on what that means.
Right. Joe Biden, in his letter, saying we'll donate to her campaign, being so close to her, I suppose he would know her position as far as resources to be able to run a successful campaign with only just a couple of months left before Americans head to the polls. Will she be able to get that necessary backing from the Democrats?
Well, I mean, there is a substantial war chest that was already raised on the assumption that Joe Biden was the candidate. There'll be some legal issues that will undoubtedly have to be untangled as to whether or not all those donations and all those pledges can be, if assuming she is the candidate, if they can all be transferred to her. But there will be an entire army of lawyers making sure that such a thing happens should she actually become the nominee. And I would bet that if she is in fact the nominee, there is going to be a lot of interest on the part of women, but not just women, in making contributions to her for her own campaign now. And that's because it's a fresh face, relatively speaking. It's a younger face, certainly. And it's someone who is going to upend all the planning on over in the other camp.
What then happens with the president now? Do you think he is going to serve out the remainder of his term? There have been calls that, well, if you are not fit to stand and run for a second term, surely you are not fit to be president. So step down now.
Oh no, I think he'll definitely serve his full term. What this decision is largely saying is these are two different, related, but two different jobs. I think I should concentrate, as his own letter says, concentrate on the wheels of government, the mechanics of government, the decisions that have to be made between now and January 20th next year. Running for office is secondary to that, and let me stand back and let other people do that now. There's only been one president in the history of the U.S. who has ever resigned, and that was Richard Nixon, of course, back in 1974. And he resigned because he was about to be impeached and convicted on the issues emanating from the Watergate scandal. By not running for re-election, he's certainly not abdicating or withdrawing from his office. He is saying, look, I can do one of these things well, two of these things badly. Let me do the one and concentrate my energies on that. And I think that largely people will nod their heads and say, yeah, there'll be a lot of noise from the Republicans saying, well, he should quit both jobs. But that's going to be a lot of, what shall we say, that'll be a lot of smoke and noise as opposed to serious thought.
Some Democrats have publicly and privately, maybe in some instances, questioned whether Kamala Harris is the best to become the party's nominee. Do you think that the debate is a non-starter, whether or not she will be the nominee?
You know, of course, it's too early to tell. It's too early to predict. Biden has endorsed her directly and publicly for the nomination. You're going to start seeing, I suspect, over the next couple of days, affirmations of this kind of support from people like Nancy Pelosi, from Barack Obama, from various of the other people who might well be considered or would have been considered as possible contenders. A number of the different governors, some senators. Part of this is going to be that certain of the governors who might otherwise have wanted to run will now look at this and say, my best chance must be in the year 2028, because if Harris wins, then you know, we can contest whether or not she should be the nominee then. If she loses, then it really is an open competition. So people like Gavin Newsom, who's the governor of California, will probably look at this and say, I think my best shot is to wait for 4 years, but get organized for it, because they have not, none of these people up until this moment really have waged anything that even begins to look like a candidacy for the nomination. And they have not raised money for that in that regard, or pledges of support, or won any delegates for that matter among the various primaries. So it's probably a non-starter, and it's just going to be whether or not the support for her is grudging or enthusiastic, and that's something we'll obviously have to watch over the next number of days.
Brooks, I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much for coming on this nation.